Hello, I'm Jan Falconer, and welcome to Not-Netflix Natters, a place where stories, family, and everyday life gives us something to think about. Let's begin. Hi, this is Not-Netflix Natters, Series 4, Episode 1. Helping families navigate an ever-changing world. You know, the funny thing about finishing a series is that it often leaves me with more questions than answers. We've talked about books, films, screens, stories, curiosity, and conversations. At first glance, they all seem like completely separate topics. But then it struck me that they all lead to exactly the same question. How do we help children navigate an ever-changing world? I think it's a question that feels more important than ever, not because the world has suddenly become more dangerous, but because it's become more complex. Information is everywhere. New technologies seems to appear almost weekly. Strong opinions are everywhere too, with everyone seeming to claim that they have the answer. As parents, grandparents, carers and teachers, that can feel overwhelming. It can be very tempting to think we have to keep up with absolutely everything, but maybe we don't. Maybe we don't have to know everything. Perhaps what really matters is that we keep on learning. Sometimes I think of my own mother. Mum died in the early 1980s when I was in my late teens. If she walked into my home today, she'd definitely recognise the garden immediately. She'd know the roses, the vegetables, the weeds. She'd recognise the kettle, the loaf of bread, and of course, a cat, or the many cats I have. But so much else would be extraordinary. The television, slim and hung on the wall. The tablet sitting on the table with lots of information and things moving. The watch that talks to a phone. The idea that I can ask a computer a question and receive an answer in milliseconds. I suspect my home might feel a little bit like something out of an episode of Star Trek, the original one. And yet the garden would still make perfect sense. Perhaps that's because, although gardening keeps changing, the gardener never stops learning. Every season is different. Some years it can be incredibly wet. Others can be bone dry. New plant varieties appear. New gardening techniques emerge. Some work out beautifully, others don't. Good gardeners don't stop gardening because the seasons change. Instead, they adapt, they observe, they ask questions, and they might try something new. Then they keep what works and quietly leave behind what doesn't. I sometimes wonder whether raising children in today's world requires that same mindset. I recently watched an episode of the new Clarkson's farm. Jeremy Clarkson was experimenting with technology designed for planting more accurately and more efficiently. The weather still had the final say, as it does so often in farming, but what struck me wasn't the machinery or the technology. No, it was his willingness to learn. The technology didn't replace his judgment, and it certainly didn't replace his farm manager's expertise. It simply became another tool. It helped make better decisions, reduce waste, and improve efficiency, even though it couldn't guarantee the outcome. That seems to me to be true of so much technology. A tool can support good judgment, but it can never replace it. The same thought came back to me when one of my grandchildren received a replacement running watch. The original watch monitored fitness, heart rate, and activity. It helped mum and dad support a child who loves to run. The newer model introduced new options. It could also communicate independently. Suddenly, there was another family decision to make, not because the technology was good or bad, simply because every new tool invites us to think about how, when, and why we use it. As I said at the time, whatever mum and dad decides goes. Different families will draw their line in different places. It doesn't matter if every family reaches exactly the same decision. What matters is that the decision is thoughtful and reflects the family's own values. Over the years, I've marked hundreds of essays, visited schools, written books, and spent time talking with teachers, librarians, parents, and children. And one thing that keeps striking me, the questions keep changing, but the children don't. They're still curious, they still ask why, and they still want stories. They still need trusted adults. They still learn through conversation, encouragement, and experience. Technology hasn't changed any of that. If anything, it's made those relationships even more important. Over the coming weeks, I'd love us to explore more ideas together, not from a place of fear, not from a place of certainty, but from a place of curiosity. We'll reflect on stories from schools, libraries, and family life. We'll think about technology, not as a hero or a villain, but as one of the many tools that families are learning to use. And perhaps most importantly, together we'll ask better questions, because I don't believe the goal is simply to raise children who know more. I believe the goal is to help families navigate an ever-changing world together, so that children grow into confident, curious, and discerning learners. The world isn't going to stop changing. Children will continue to grow up in a world that surprises all of us from time to time. The question isn't whether they'll face change. Of course they will. The real question is whether we'll help them navigate it with curiosity, confidence, and good judgment. So perhaps that's something we can keep learning together. After all, the best gardeners never stop learning, and perhaps neither should we. Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, visit my website, and explore the books. Until next time, take care.